Hello. Welcome to the Infidelity Stories channel. Before I begin, I ask that you keep my identity a secret. I'm a well-known American influencer, and what I'm about to tell could ruin my career if it became public. This is my story, full of love, betrayal, and surprising discoveries that changed my life forever. It all started on a sunny Saturday afternoon in New York City. I had just finished a photo shoot for a famous clothing brand and decided to grab a coffee in the neighborhood where I grew up, something I rarely did due to my busy schedule. The aroma of freshly ground coffee drew me to a cozy cafe on the corner, a place that didn't exist when I lived there. As I entered, my eyes scanned the environment, appreciating the rustic and welcoming decor. That's when I saw him. Sitting alone at a table in the corner, absorbed in a thick book, was William, my high school ex-boyfriend. My heart skipped a beat. He looked different, more mature, with some grey at his temples, but he was still unmistakably the William I knew. For a moment I hesitated. Should I approach him? What if he didn't recognize me? Or worse, what if he recognized me as the influencer I'd become and not as the girl he once knew? I took a deep breath and decided to risk it. "William?" I called softly, approaching his table. He looked up from his book, a look of confusion quickly replaced by recognition and surprise. "Oh my God, is it really you?" he exclaimed, quickly standing up. "It's been so long." We hugged, a slightly awkward embrace, loaded with memories and a long-forgotten familiarity. "Sit with me," he invited, pulling out a chair. "I can't believe we ran into each other like this after so many years." I sat down, feeling a mix of nostalgia and nervousness. "Neither can I," replied, smiling. "What have you been up to, William?" He closed the book he was reading. I noticed it was about architecture, something that had always fascinated him, and began to tell me about his life. William had graduated in architecture, as he had always dreamed, and now owned a moderately successful firm in the city. "And you?" he asked, his green eyes fixed on me. "I heard you've become famous on the internet. Is that true?" I felt my cheeks flush slightly. It was always strange to discuss my fame with people from my past. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, trying to sound modest. "I work as a digital influencer. It's crazy, actually." William seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about my work, how I had started, what the challenges were. It was refreshing to talk to someone who knew me before all the fame, someone who was interested in me as a person, not as a celebrity. The hours flew by as we talked. William told me about his failed marriage, from which he had a 23-year-old daughter named Sarah. He talked about the challenges of being a single father, about how his daughter was his greatest joy, even when they disagreed. "She's incredible," he said, a proud smile on his face. "Smart, determined. Sometimes I think she's too stubborn for her own good, but I suppose she got that from me." I laughed, remembering how stubborn William could be when he wanted to. "I bet she's wonderful. You always wanted to be a father, remember? We used to joke about having a house full of kids." His smile faltered a bit. "Yeah, things don't always turn out as we plan, do they?" I nodded, understanding perfectly. My own life had taken turns I never imagined in my teens. When the cafe started to close, I realized we had spent hours talking. We exchanged numbers, promising to keep in touch. In the days that followed, I couldn't get William out of my head. There was something comforting about being with someone who knew me before all the fame, someone with whom I could be myself without filters or poses for the cameras. We started seeing each other frequently: dinners, walks in the park, lazy afternoons watching old movies we loved as teenagers. It was like we had gone back in time, but now we were adults, with experiences and stories to share. William was a refreshing contrast to the frantic world of social media I lived in. He was quiet, reflective, preferred long conversations to selfies and stories. With him, I could relax, just be myself. It was on one of these quiet nights at William's house that I met Sarah. We were watching a documentary about modern architecture. William's passion had clearly not diminished over the years. When we heard the front door open, "Dad, are you home?" a female voice called. William paused the movie. "In the living room, honey," he replied. Sarah entered, a beautiful young woman with the same penetrating green eyes as her father. She stopped abruptly when she saw me, her eyes widening in recognition. "I can't believe it," she exclaimed, a wide smile spreading across her face. Are you dating her, Dad?" William seemed a bit uncomfortable with his daughter's enthusiasm. "Sarah, I know who she is," Sarah interrupted, practically jumping with excitement. "I follow you on all social media. Your videos are amazing." I smiled, a little embarrassed by her enthusiasm, but also flattered. "Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your dad talks a lot about you." "I hope good things," she laughed, sitting with us. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you were dating a celebrity?" William cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "We're just friends, Sarah. We recently reconnected." For now, Sarah winked at me, making me laugh. The dynamic between father and daughter was fascinating to observe. It was clear they loved each other deeply, but there was also an underlying tension, as if they were constantly navigating turbulent waters. Sarah and I soon fell into an animated conversation about social media, trends, content production tips. She was trying to build her own online presence and had thousands of questions. "How do you deal with haters?" she asked at one point. "Sometimes the comments are so cruel." I sighed, remembering some of the particularly unpleasant comments I had received. "It's not easy," I admitted. "At first, every negative comment affected me deeply, but over time, you learn to filter. Focus on constructive comments and fans who really care." William, who had been quiet during our conversation, suddenly spoke. "I don't understand why someone would choose a career where they're constantly exposed to that kind of negativity." There was a moment of tense silence. Sarah looked at her father with a mixture of frustration and disappointment. "Dad," she said, her tone carefully controlled. "We've talked about this. It's the future. You can't ignore the power of social media." William shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say he'd rather not discuss the subject. I realized this must be a recurring source of conflict between them. To ease the tension, I suggested Sarah show me some of her content. Her eyes lit up, and she quickly grabbed her phone, eager to share her work. As we scrolled through her feed, I was impressed with Sarah's natural talent for photography and video editing. Her aesthetic was unique, a mix of vibrant colors and interesting angles that captured everyday life in an almost poetic way. "This is amazing, Sarah," I sincerely praised. "You have a unique eye." She blushed at the compliment, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, it means a lot coming from you." I looked at William, expecting to see pride in his eyes, but instead, I saw concern. He watched our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I grew closer and closer. She started visiting me frequently, eager for advice and tips on how to grow her online presence. I loved our connection, the energy we shared. It was like having a younger sister, a friend who understood my world in a way few people did. One day, while we were editing some photos for Sarah's Instagram, she suddenly became serious. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. "Of course," I replied, a little surprised by the change in her tone. "How do you deal with the pressure of being perfect all the time? You know, always looking happy and successful on social media, even when things aren't so good in real life?" The question caught me off guard. It was something I struggled with daily, but rarely discussed openly. "It's not easy," I admitted after a moment of reflection. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living two different lives. The polished and perfect version I show online, and the real version, with all the imperfections and daily struggles." Sarah nodded, understanding. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," she said softly. "If it wouldn't be better to have a normal life, without all this pressure." I put my hand on hers, feeling a wave of protection for this young woman who seemed so vulnerable at that moment. "Look, Sarah, this world has its ups and downs, but if it's something you really love to do, it's worth it. The secret is to find a balance, to remember that you're more than your likes and followers." She smiled, squeezing my hand in gratitude. "Thank you." It's good to be able to talk about this with someone who understands. At that moment, I felt our connection deepen. It was no longer just about social media tips or photo editing. We were sharing something deeper, more personal. As Sarah and I grew closer, I felt my relationship with William cool. He didn't like it when we talked about work, thought it was all very superficial. Our conversations became monotonous, our nights together, routine. One night, after a particularly silent dinner, William finally expressed his frustration. "Do you realize we hardly talk about anything other than social media and follower numbers lately?" he asked, his voice loaded with irritation. I sighed, feeling the tension grow between us. "William, it's my job. It's an important part of my life." "And what happened to all the other parts?" he shot back. "Remember when we used to talk about books, about our dreams? Now it seems like everything revolves around likes and views." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was right in part. I had let myself be consumed by my work, by the constant need to be connected, to produce content. "You're right," I admitted softly. "I'm sorry. I guess sometimes I forget to disconnect." William's face softened a bit. "I understand it's your job. I just miss the girl I knew, the one who dreamed of changing the world, not just having millions of followers." His words affected me more than I'd like to admit. Had I changed that much? Had I lost sight of who I really was behind the online persona I had created? That night, lying in bed next to William, I couldn't sleep. My mind was full of doubts and questions. I loved my work, loved the connection I had with my followers, the ability to influence and inspire people. But at what cost? Had I sacrificed important parts of myself in the process? The days that followed were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was William, an anchor to my past, reminding me of who I used to be. On the other, there was Sarah, vibrant and full of energy, representing everything I loved about my current work. It was in this state of emotional confusion that I suggested a trip to create content with Sarah. Part of me knew it was an escape, a way to avoid dealing with the growing problems in my relationship with William. But another part was genuinely excited about the prospect of spending more time with Sarah, exploring our creativity together. When I proposed the idea to William, he wasn't enthusiastic, to say the least. "Do you really need to go?" he asked, disappointment evident in his voice. "I thought we could spend more time together, try to reconnect." I felt a pang of guilt, but pushed it to the back of my mind. "It's an important opportunity, William. Besides, it'll be good for Sarah. She can learn a lot from this trip." He sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration I knew well. "All right," he said finally. "Just be careful, okay? And keep in touch?" I nodded, grateful he hadn't argued further. Deep down, I knew I was disappointing him, but the excitement of the impending trip outweighed my guilt. Sarah was ecstatic when I told her about the trip. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as we discussed the details. "It's going to be amazing," she exclaimed, hugging me impulsively. "I can't wait to create incredible content with you." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon I found myself caught up in her plans and ideas. We spent hours discussing locations, looks, concepts for photos and videos. It was invigorating to work with someone so passionate and full of fresh ideas. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. We said goodbye to William at the airport, a somewhat tense and uncomfortable farewell. As we boarded the plane, I couldn't help but notice the worried look in his eyes. But as soon as we took off, I allowed myself to be carried away by the excitement of the adventure that awaited us. Our destination was a paradise island in the Caribbean, famous for its white sand beaches and crystal clear waters. As soon as we arrived, we dove headfirst into content creation. Sunny days were filled with beach photo shoots, vlogs exploring the local culture, and tropical makeup and fashion tutorials. Sarah was an amazing work partner. She had a keen eye for composition and wasn't afraid to try new ideas. Often I found myself admiring her creativity and enthusiasm. She reminded me of myself when I was starting out, full of dreams and determination. The nights were filled with long conversations by the sea, sharing stories, fears, and dreams. It was during one of these nights, after a few mojitos, that Sarah made a confession that changed everything. We were sitting on the sand, watching the stars reflected in the calm sea, when Sarah suddenly became serious. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Something I've never told anyone, not even my dad." I nodded, curious and a little apprehensive at her tone. "Of course, Sarah, you can tell me anything." She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I think I'm attracted to women." The silence that followed seemed charged with electricity. My heart raced, though I didn't know exactly why. "Wow," I finally managed to say. Thank you for trusting me to share this, Sarah." She turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've never felt like this before. It's scary and exciting at the same time. I don't know what to do." Without thinking, I reached out and held her hand. "It's okay, Sarah. There's nothing wrong with how you feel. Discovering your sexuality can be confusing, but you're not alone in this." She squeezed my hand, a small smile appearing on her lips. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." At that moment, I felt something change between us, a deeper, more intimate connection, and with it came a wave of confusing feelings that I wasn't prepared to face. The following days were a mix of intense emotions. Sarah and I became even closer, sharing secrets, fears, and dreams. I found myself admiring the curve of her neck, the sparkle in her eyes, the sound of her laughter. It was confusing and exciting at the same time. I tried to rationalize my feelings. It was just admiration, I told myself, just a close connection between friends. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. On the last night of the trip, after a particularly successful photo shoot and a few more mojitos, it happened. We were sitting on the balcony of our room, looking at the stars when Sarah turned to me. "You're amazing," she whispered, her eyes fixed on mine. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I don't know who moved first, but suddenly we were kissing. It was soft at first, hesitant, but soon turned into something passionate, urgent. My entire body seemed to be on fire. When we separated, breathless, I saw my own desire reflected in Sarah's eyes. We didn't need words. That night we explored each other with an intensity I had never experienced before. Morning brought guilt and confusion. What had we done? How would this affect William, my career? We decided to keep it a secret, at least for now, while we tried to understand our feelings. Back in the States, things got complicated. I tried to act normally with William, but my thoughts were always with Sarah. We met secretly, stealing moments together whenever possible. It was wrong, I knew, but I couldn't stop. The tension at home was palpable. William knew something had changed, although he didn't know exactly what. Our conversations became forced, our nights together, uncomfortable. "You've been different since you came back from the trip," he commented one night, as I absent-mindedly picked at my food during dinner. "How so?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but feeling my heart race. He studied me for a moment, his eyes full of concern, distant, as if your mind was always somewhere else. "Did something happen on the trip that you're not telling me?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of guilt on my shoulders. "No, of course not," I lied, hating myself for it. "I'm just tired. The trip was intense." He didn't seem convinced, but didn't push further. The silence that followed was deafening. Weeks passed in this tense dynamic. I felt divided, guilty, but at the same time more alive than ever. Sarah made me feel things I never imagined possible. It was as if I had discovered a new part of myself. Our secret meetings were full of passion and discovery. We explored not just our bodies, but also our minds and hearts. Sarah made me laugh like no one else could, challenged me intellectually, inspired me to be a better version of myself. But the guilt was always there, a constant weight in my chest. Every time I looked at William, every time he hugged or kissed me, I felt like I was betraying not just him, but also myself. One night, after a particularly intense encounter with Sarah, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to be honest, no matter the consequences. I came home determined to tell William everything. He deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But when I entered, I found the house dark, except for a faint light coming from the living room. William was sitting on the couch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes red. My heart sank. Something was very wrong. "William," I called softly, approaching cautiously. "What happened?" He raised his eyes to me, and what I saw in them made me freeze. Anger, pain, betrayal. "Why don't you tell me?" he said, his voice hoarse and bitter. "Why don't you tell me about you and my daughter?" I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. How did he find out? What did he know exactly? I don't know what you're talking about, I stammered, in a pathetic attempt to deny. William laughed, a harsh sound without humour. "Don't lie to me, not anymore." He picked up his phone and showed me the screen. It was a photo of me and Sarah kissing on the beach during our trip. "One of your fans took this, posted it online. Congratulations, you're viral." My world crumbled at that instant. Everything I had built, my career, my relationship, my life, it was all about to crumble. "William, I can explain," I began, but he interrupted me. "Explain what? That you're sleeping with my daughter? That you two are making a fool out of me?" His voice increased with each word, years of repressed anger finally exploding. The discussion that followed was brutal. William shouted, cried, broke things around the house. I tried to explain myself, but each word seemed to only make things worse. At some point, Sarah arrived, attracted by the noise. Saying his daughter only increased William's fury. He accused her of betrayal, of ingratitude. Sarah cried, begging him to understand that it wasn't what he thought. When William finally calmed down, he looked at us with a mixture of disgust and sadness. "You disgust me," he said before leaving, slamming the door. Sarah and I stood there, amid the wreckage of the living room, crying and hugging each other. Our bubble of secret happiness had burst, and reality was much harsher than we had imagined. The days that followed were a nightmare. William filed a lawsuit against me, alleging moral and emotional damages. He threatened to fully expose my relationship with Sarah to the media, which would ruin my influencer career. Sarah, rejected by her father and with nowhere to go, moved into my house. Our relationship, born in passion and secrecy, now faced the test of reality. We had to deal not only with our complicated feelings, but also with the legal and social consequences of our actions. The media, of course, had a field day with the story. Sensationalist headlines screamed about the scandalous love triangle involving a famous influencer. My followers were divided. Some supported me, others condemned me vehemently. I lost contracts, partnerships, friends. William, driven by anger and resentment, started blackmailing me. He demanded large sums of money to keep our story away from the sleaziest tabloids. Each day brought a new threat, a new ultimatum. I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, there was the growing love I felt for Sarah, a connection I had never experienced before. On the other, the guilt for having betrayed William, the fear of losing everything I had built over the years. Sarah was suffering too. She had lost her father, was confused about her sexuality, and felt guilty for having caused so much pain. There were nights when I found her crying alone, questioning all her choices. One night as we lay in bed, Sarah turned to me, her eyes full of tears. "Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing," she whispered. "If all this suffering is worth it." I felt my heart tighten. "Do you regret it?" I asked, fearing the answer. She was silent for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I don't regret us. But I regret the way it happened, the harm we caused." I hugged her tight, feeling my own tears start to fall. "Me too," I admitted, "but I can't regret loving you. Even with all the pain, You've brought so much light to my life." We kissed softly, a kiss full of love and mutual understanding. At that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, we would face it together. Amidst all this chaos, I realized I needed to make a decision. I couldn't continue living under William's threats, nor could I deny the feelings I had for Sarah. But I also couldn't ignore the harm we had caused. After much reflection, I decided to face the situation head-on. First, I sought a lawyer to deal with William's legal threats. Then, I began to consider the idea of telling my story publicly, on my own terms. I talked at length with Sarah about this. She was scared of the idea of exposure, but also tired of living in hiding. "What if people hate us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if this completely destroys our lives?" I took her hands in mine, looking into her eyes. "Maybe it will," I admitted, "but maybe it will also free us. We can't keep living in fear, Sarah. We need to face this with our heads held high." After much discussion, we came to an agreement. We would be honest, not just with the world, but also with ourselves. I spent days preparing a long and emotional video for my followers. In it, I told the whole story, omitting nothing. I talked about my relationship with William, about how I fell in love with Sarah, about the discovery of my own sexuality. I apologized for the harm I caused, but also defended my right to love and be who I truly am. "I know many of you will be disappointed in me," I said in the video, looking directly at the camera. "Maybe some will even stop following me, and I understand. But I can't live a lie anymore. This is me with all my mistakes and imperfections, and I'm tired of apologizing for who I am and who I love." The video was posted on a Sunday morning. Sarah and I watched it together, holding hands, trembling with fear and anticipation. The first hours were the hardest. We watched the number of views rise rapidly, comments multiplying every minute. To our surprise, the reaction was mostly positive. Of course, there were criticisms and judgments, but many people supported us. I received messages from followers who identified with our story, who felt inspired to be honest about their own sexuality. One comment in particular touched me deeply. "Thank you for your courage. Your story gave me the strength to finally come out to my family. You saved my life today." William, caught off guard by our honesty, backed off on his threats. The legal process still continued, but lost much of its strength. With time, he even began to show signs of acceptance, although the relationship with Sarah remained tense. A few weeks after the video, I received an unexpected message from William. "I don't approve of what you did, but I understand that I can't control your hearts. Sarah is still my daughter, and I love her. Maybe with time, we can try to rebuild our family in a new way." It was the first step in a long process of healing and reconciliation. The months that followed were full of learning and growth. Sarah and I had to learn to navigate a public relationship, deal with the scrutiny of media and social networks. It wasn't easy, but each challenge united us even more. I began to use my platform to talk about diversity, acceptance, and love in all its forms. Sarah found her own voice, starting a blog where she shared her journey of self-discovery. A year after the video that changed our lives, Sarah and I sat down to reflect on everything that had happened. "If you could go back," I asked her, "would you do everything differently?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I would do some things differently. I would have been more honest from the beginning, would have hurt fewer people in the process, but I'll never regret loving you." I hugged her, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Me neither," I whispered. Today, looking back, I see how that casual reunion with William completely changed the course of my life. Through pain and conflict, I found true love and discovered parts of myself that I didn't even know existed. I don't regret the path I chose, although I wish I had caused less pain in the process. I learned that love doesn't always come in the forms we expect, and that being true to yourself is the greatest act of courage we can perform. My story with Sarah continues to unfold every day. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know we'll face it together, with honesty and love. And to all those who are struggling with their own identity or with unconventional loves, I say, be brave, be honest, and above all, be yourselves. This is my story. A story of betrayal, yes, but also of discovery, courage, and true love. A story that taught me that sometimes you need to break the rules to find happiness. And that, in the end, love always wins, even if the path there is full of obstacles. Thank you for listening to me. I hope my journey can inspire others to live their truth, no matter how scary it may seem. Because in the end, it's only by being authentic that we can find true happiness.